There are moments in life when the truth doesn't just change everything, it destroys everything you thought you knew. For most people, identity is something solid, something unquestioned. You grow up knowing who your parents are, where you came from, what your story is. It becomes part of you, something so deeply rooted that you never stop to question it. But for one woman, that entire foundation collapsed in a single moment, revealing that her entire life had been built on a lie that began before she could even remember. It started in the middle of the night in a hospital room where nothing seemed out of place. A newborn baby, just 19 days old, had been admitted after showing signs of a serious infection. Her parents were young, scared, and desperate for help, trusting that the place meant to protect their child would keep her safe. Doctors and nurses moved through the halls, machines hummed quietly, and everything felt controlled, predictable. There was no sign that anything was about to go wrong. But somewhere inside that hospital, someone was watching. At some point during that night, as staff changed shifts and the routine of the hospital briefly shifted into a moment of distraction, something unthinkable happened. The baby disappeared. No alarms, no witnesses, no immediate explanation. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. By the time anyone realized what had happened, it was already too late. The panic that followed was immediate and overwhelming. The hospital was locked down, rooms were searched, staff were questioned, and authorities were called in within minutes. Police flooded the building, searching every floor, every hallway, every possible exit. Helicopters circled overhead, dogs were brought in. The surrounding area was combed through with urgency and precision. There was one assumption guiding all of it. Whoever had taken the baby couldn't have gone far, but they were wrong, because whoever did this had planned it. There was one detail that stood out early in the investigation. The baby's mother recalled a woman she had seen not long before everything happened. A woman dressed in white, calm, reassuring, someone who had approached her during one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. She had spoken gently, offering comfort, telling her everything would be okay. In that moment, there had been no reason to question it. In a hospital, surrounded by medical staff, someone dressed like that belonged there. But no one working that night matched that description. It was a small detail, but it was everything. A sketch was created. The image spread quickly. News stations picked up the story, broadcasting it across the city, then across the country. Posters were printed. Faces filled television screens. A newborn had been taken from a hospital, something that had never happened before in that city. The case exploded into national attention almost instantly, and yet, nothing. No confirmed sightings, no solid leads, no trace of the baby. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually, years. The case never truly went away, but it faded. The intensity slowed, the media moved on, and the world continued forward. But for the family, time didn't move the same way. There was no closure, no answers, just a constant silent question that never left. What really happened that night? While all of this unfolded, far away from where it began, another life was quietly taking shape. A girl was growing up, completely unaware that anything about her life was unusual. To her, everything felt normal. She had a mother, a home, a routine. There was no reason to question any of it, at least not at first. But as she got older, small things began to feel off. Not in obvious ways, nothing dramatic, just subtle differences. The way she looked compared to everyone around her, the feeling that she didn't quite belong the way others seemed to. It wasn't something she could explain, and it wasn't something anyone around her acknowledged, so she ignored it. For years, life continued like that. Questions buried under routine, doubts pushed aside, until eventually, something happened that made it impossible to ignore anymore. She needed a document, a simple thing, something everyone has, something that proves who you are, a birth certificate. When she asked for it, the response wasn't what she expected. There was hesitation, avoidance, excuses that didn't quite make sense. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a misunderstanding, maybe a delay. But the more she insisted, the more uncomfortable the situation became. And eventually, she got it. But when she tried to use it, everything changed. Because it wasn't real. That single moment, being told that the document proving her identity was false, was the beginning of everything unraveling. It wasn't just about paperwork anymore. It was about something much deeper, something that had been hidden for years. When she confronted the person she had trusted her entire life, the answer she received only made things worse. She was told that she wasn't biologically related, that she had been taken in, that her past wasn't what she thought it was, but there were no details, no explanations, just silence where the truth should have been. And for most people, that might have been the end of it. A difficult truth, accepted without ever being fully understood, but not this time, because she couldn't let it go. There's something powerful about not knowing who you are. It creates a kind of tension that doesn't fade, it doesn't settle. It pushes you to look deeper, to search for answers even when there's nothing obvious to follow. So she started searching. At first it was small, looking through records, trying to find anything that could connect her to a past she didn't remember, but there was nothing. No clear path, no direct answers. Until one day, she found something. A photo, not just any photo, but one that felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. A missing child, taken years ago. A case that had once been everywhere, then slowly disappeared from public attention. And the more she looked at it, the more it looked like her. Not exactly, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to make her stop. Enough to make her question everything. That moment, staring at a photo, seeing something of herself in someone who was supposed to be missing, changed everything. Because from that point on, it wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a direction, a path, something real enough to follow. Up until that moment, everything she felt had been instinct, doubt, and quiet suspicion. But now, for the first time, there was something tangible, something she could actually investigate. And she didn't hesitate. She reached out, carefully, almost unsure if she should, because there was always the possibility that she was wrong, that this was just another dead end, another coincidence, another moment where hope would rise, only to collapse again. But this time, it didn't. When she made contact with the organization responsible for missing children cases, she wasn't treated like someone chasing a vague idea. They listened. They took her seriously, and more importantly, they saw it too. The resemblance. Not perfect, not undeniable, but enough to justify one thing. A test. A DNA test. It sounds simple, clinical, just a process. A comparison between samples, a confirmation of biological connection, but in that moment, it was something much bigger than that. It was the line between two completely different lives. On one side, everything she had known. On the other, everything she didn't. And once that test was done, there would be no going back. Somewhere else in another city, two people were about to receive a call they had been waiting for nearly 2 decades. They had never stopped believing. Not completely. Even after years had passed. Even after the case had gone cold. Even after the world had moved on. They had held on to something that most people would have lost a long time ago. Hope. Quiet, painful, persistent hope. So when the call finally came, it didn't feel real. At first, it sounded like a mistake, like something too unlikely to actually be happening, because the idea that their daughter, the baby who had been taken from them all those years ago, could still be alive and found, it was almost impossible to process. But the process moved forward. The test was completed. The results were analyzed, and then, finally, the truth came out. She wasn't just similar. She wasn't just a possibility. She was the baby who had disappeared. She had been living another life, under another name, in another state, for nearly 20 years, and she had found herself. That moment changed everything, not just for her, but for everyone involved, because now, what had once been a mystery was something real, something confirmed, something that had consequences. The girl who had grown up believing one story about her life now had to face something completely different. A new identity, a new history, a new family, and none of it was simple, because finding the truth doesn't automatically fix anything. It just replaces one reality with another. She traveled to meet them, the people who had been searching for her since she was just 19 days old. Her biological parents. The moment they saw each other wasn't something you can fully describe. It wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper than that. It was time collapsing. Years of absence, meeting in a single moment. They weren't meeting a baby anymore. They were meeting a stranger who was also their daughter. And she wasn't meeting parents she remembered. She was meeting people she had never known, but somehow belonged to. It wasn't simple. It wasn't immediate. There was no instant resolution where everything made sense, because real life doesn't work like that. But it was real, and for the first time, everything was out in the open. At the same time, the other side of the story couldn't be ignored anymore. The woman who had raised her, the one who had built that life, the one who had taken her. For years, she had lived as if nothing had happened, as if the past had been erased, as if what she had done would never come back. But it did, and when the truth came out, there was no way to avoid it. She was arrested, and when investigators began to piece everything together, the story that emerged was as disturbing as it was calculated. Years earlier, she had lost multiple pregnancies, loss after loss, and instead of accepting that reality, she made a decision, one that would affect multiple lives for decades. She went to that hospital, she pretended to belong, she gained trust, she waited, and when the moment came, she took the baby, walked out, and disappeared. No panic, no hesitation, just gone. For years, she raised that child as if she were her own, built a life around a lie so complete that it almost worked, almost, until the truth found its way back. In the end, she was sentenced, and the case that had once shocked an entire city finally had an answer. But even with everything resolved, one question remained. What happens after the truth? Because the story doesn't end when something is discovered. That's just where another one begins. A life split in two. And there was no clear way to put it back together. Because how do you choose between two versions of your own life? The one you lived, and the one that was taken from you. The one built on memories, and the one built on truth. There was no reset, no way to rewind time and experience the childhood that had been stolen. No way to replace birthdays, moments, conversations, the small things that shape who someone becomes. All of that was gone. And yet, at the same time, another life had been lived. A full life, with its own memories, its own emotions, its own connections. And that made everything even more complicated. Because this wasn't just about loss. It was about conflict, about carrying two realities at the same time, and knowing that neither of them could be fully abandoned. The family who had lost her never stopped searching. For them, time had frozen in that hospital room. Every year that passed only added more weight to the absence. More questions, more what-ifs, more moments where they imagined what her life could have been like. And then suddenly, after nearly 2 decades, she was there, not as a memory, not as a possibility, but as a real person standing in front of them, alive, changed, grown, and carrying a life they had never been part of. At the same time, the woman who raised her wasn't just a stranger. She was part of her story too. For years, she had been the only version of mother she knew, the one who was there during childhood, the one present in everyday life. And even though everything about that relationship was built on a lie, it still existed. And that's what makes stories like this so difficult, because reality isn't clean. It doesn't separate things into right and wrong in a way that makes everything easy to process. It leaves you in the middle, holding pieces that don't fit perfectly together, trying to understand something that was never meant to make sense. In the end, justice was served. The person responsible was held accountable. The truth was revealed. The case was closed. But closure is a different thing, because even when a story reaches its conclusion, the impact doesn't disappear. It stays, in memories, in relationships, in the quiet moments where everything comes back. And maybe that's the part people don't talk about enough. What happens after the truth is found, after the headlines fade, after the story stops being something people follow and becomes something someone has to live with. For her, that meant rebuilding, piece by piece, understanding where she came from, understanding who she had been, and deciding who she wanted to become moving forward, not defined by what happened, but shaped by how she chose to respond to it. And maybe that's the only real way a story like this can end, not with everything perfectly resolved, but with the truth finally in the open, because for 18 years, that truth was hidden, buried inside a life that wasn't supposed to exist. And yet, it survived, waiting, until the moment someone was willing to question everything, to look deeper, to follow a feeling that didn't go away. And that's what makes this story different. It wasn't solved by chance. It wasn't uncovered by accident. It was found by the person it belonged to. And that changes everything. Because if something like this can stay hidden for that long, in plain sight, in everyday life, then it raises a question that's hard to ignore. How many other stories are still out there, unseen, unquestioned, waiting for the moment someone finally looks close enough to notice?
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service. If you feel you have reached this recording in error, please check the number and try your call again.